Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and what we're talking about today is callbacks and higher order functions, and just sort of this whole concept of why you would do this. Now the concept of a callback really just means to pass a function as a parameter. So for example, if I did this, I create a function, so we'll call this outer func. So const outer func equals inner func. Okay, equals inner func, and then there's an arrow. Okay, console.log. Before I run before I run the function, and then we're going to assume that whatever inner func is a function. So we're going to say inner func invoke that function. We don't know what that function is yet. Console.log after I run the function. So essentially in this function, there's three things that this outer func does. It console logs this, then it's going to run the function we passed through as an argument, and then log something else. And this function being passed in as a parameter is referred to as the callback. Okay, so basically, I do this, outer func. Okay, we'll do our first one, pass to a function, console.log 1. You see, I'm basically just plopping a function as an argument. I could do a function by name. I could store in a variable and then just plop that variable in here. But a lot of times with callbacks, you'll just actually write the function. You just put in deliver an anonymous function as the argument. And I can use this function several times. And change this one to 2, and this one to 3. Save. Okay, so before I run the function, so this is the first time we run it, then second time, and again, each time we console log a different number because it's a different function being run in the middle. Okay, and that's just all happening from this inner func. Okay, you could pass it functions that already exist, or I could pass it a function that I custom made, whatever. The function doesn't know what you're going to give it. It just knows whatever you give, it's going to try to run it as a function. That's all callback is. I'm passing the function as an argument to a function. Nice. Okay, so what about this whole idea of higher order functions? Well, a higher order function is a function that acts as a wrapper. So essentially, it's a callback function. It's a function that takes a callback, takes our function as an argument, and basically I'm breaking apart some logic. So let's say I have this logic here. Okay, so if I want to like loop over a object, which is a little bit more tricky, but what I want to do is I want to get the keys and all this stuff. I may have to do something like this. So I'll sit there. My logic may look like this. Const keys equals object dot keys. Actually, well, we need to have an object. So we'll just say const my obj equals name Alex Merced and age 34. Okay, so there's our object. So we'll use this function that's going to basically store an array of the keys of the object in this value. Const values equals object.values, which will store an array of the values of the object. Cool. Now, let's see here. Then we would do a loop for every key of Oh, sorry for all the sirens in the background. I do live in Brooklyn, which can be kind of noisy. For every key of keys, we'll do a thing. And in this case, if I do it this way, I really don't need values. And I could have technically used a for in loop if I've done it this way. So let me think if I want to do that. Yeah, I guess I could do that. Okay. For key in my obj. We'll just use a for and loop. We'll keep it simple. Cool. And then what I want to do is just console.log my obj and then that particular key. So this will just console log Alex said, then 34. Now here's the thing. So that means every time I want to loop over my object, I have to create this for loop and then separately create what I want to do in the for loop. So there's these two things, but this thing I might do in a lot of different situations. This whole, well, actually technically the for loop's right here. I might want to do that in a lot of situations. So what might make sense is to create a higher order function, a wrapper function. Okay. So what I'll do is maybe make a function called const loop obj. And it'll take 2 arguments. It'll take the object we want to loop over. And then we'll take a func to run on that loop. So instead of just basically, I'll recreate the same thing just so you can see what happens in a second. So essentially this wrapper function, what it does is that it'll have the loop for key in for every key in obj. Okay, what we'll do is we're going to run the func, except to the func, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the key, and we'll pass in the value, obj key. And whatever that function does, it'll just do to each thing. Okay, so save. Now I have a function that just loops over my object, and I don't have to type in that whole loop logic every time. So I could be like loop obj my obj, and then since this function gets passed 2 arguments, key and the value, I can just write my callback like this: key value. Doesn't matter what words I use. Just again, the first one's always going to be the key. The second one's always going to be the value, because in the function I always pass the key in first, and then pass in the value second. Okay, and then I can console.log the value. And essentially this is the same thing as this, except in callback form. So let me just run that. Let's see, still prints Alex percent 34. So why would I do this? This did look like a little bit bigger than the original version, a little bit more typing. The benefit is if I'm doing a lot of stuff, I never have to type in that loop logic. I just have to worry about what do I want to do once. And then this wrapper function will go and do it over and over again. So the looping, the looping logic no longer has to be something I have to worry about. So since it's an object, I might do something like this. Loop obj my obj. Okay. Key value. And just type something like this. Switch key. So here I can make a switch that just loops over different keys and does whatever I want to each key, but I don't have to worry about the actual looping part. I just pass the function of what I want it to do on each loop. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm just taking larger processes and discovering which pieces of those processes I'm going to repeat over and over again in different contexts, and breaking them up into separate functions that work together. So switch, so this case I can do a case, you know, if the key is name. You see that I do that lowercase, I'm pretty sure I did. Yep, name and age. So if the case is name, it'll just console.log. This is my name. Let's make that a string. Then break. Then case. Age. Console.log. This is my age. Break. And then default. Break. Nothing happens. Save. Okay, but notice I didn't have to put in the loop logic again. Loopobj figures all that stuff out for me. All I have to do is just make this function with my logic, and it'll do that to each loop. So you see, this is my name, this is my age. So here's the first time we use loopobj. So I can do different things, and I never have to repeat that looping logic again. I never have to figure out how to do that again. That's the benefit of a higher order function. What it does is that you take one piece, and then you pass in a function for the piece that'll change. So the looping part doesn't change. I'm going to loop the same way over an object no matter what. But what does change was what I may want to do on each loop. So I'm just passing in the second part. And that's the beauty of higher order functions. They act as wrappers around other functions. Okay, in many languages they have what's called a decorator. So technically what I could have, in a language that has decorators, what would have happened is you would use something like, and JavaScript does have decorators, it's just not officially implemented in the language yet. But the idea is that loopobj would essentially be the decorator, and then here I would put like the function that it wraps around. So it would be the same thing as me just passing in that callback, but it would be like that. And then it would wrap itself around the function right afterwards. That's it. So if you ever see that kind of syntax, you do see it a lot in like TypeScript. They'll make use of decorators. It's just another way to do higher order functions. In React, there's higher order components, which are just components that wrap around other components. So that way you can separate pieces of your logic between different components. So it's just the same concept. When you ever hear that term higher order, it just generally means it's a wrapper. Has a higher hierarchy. That's why it's higher order. But really it's just a wrapper. You're separating your logic across multiple functions that work in conjunction. It's kind of like having a vacuum cleaner with a bunch of different extensions for the hose. It's the same vacuum cleaner, but when you attach the different heads to the vacuum cleaner, it helps you do different things. Okay, so the higher order function always does the same thing, but depending on what you pass in as the callback, it does different things. Probably the most used higher order functions in JavaScript are the array functions. Okay, we'll go over a couple of them real quick. So first we'll create an array. Const my array equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what the array higher order functions do is they take a callback, they generally loop over the array, execute a function each go around, and then end slightly differently depending on which one you're using. Everyone's favorite, I would say, is map. So what map does is it takes your callback, iterates it over the array. That function will return a value, and it creates an array of the returned values. So in that case, and the cool thing about the higher order functions built into arrays is you don't have to actually pass the array as an argument. You just pass the callback because it's part of the array prototype. So it's built into the array. So it would be like my_r.map, and then you pass in a callback, and the callback takes in the value and the index. Okay, so in this case, what I want to do is just add 1 to each one. So I will say add 1, we'll just say value return value plus 1. So each time it loops, it's going to take whatever the current value is and add 1. And actually what we'll do is we'll have more fun with it. We'll add the index as well. And we'll just say const new array equals the result of this map. And then we'll console.log new array. Save. So you see I get this array of these numbers that are the result of that. And this logic could be super complicated. This could be super long, but I don't have to think about the looping part. I just know, just worry about that I do the right process to what I'm doing to each individual element. So I can focus on that and not have to focus on the looping part. The map function already kind of takes care of a lot of that for me. And assembling it into a new array. Then the other really popular one is filter. What filter does is that you pass a function, and the function is going to return true or false. And anytime it returns true, it takes that element and returns it back to the into a new array. So instead of returning a process, I want to return a Boolean expression. So I might want to return, you know, is the value modulus 2 equal 0? So basically, is it an even number? So when I do this, it'll check to the first one, run that function. So is 1 modulus 2 equals 0? No, so that's not an even number. Yes, no, yes, no, yes. So only the ones that return true get to be part of the new array. Save. And there you go, see only the even numbers. So that's filter. And then there's sum. What sum does, it runs a test and just says, hey, are some of these things this thing? So long as one, so you're still returning a Boolean expression, but if only one of them are true, then they're all true. I mean, then it returns true, because you're not asking if all of the things are even. You're just asking are some of the things are even. Okay. Cool. Okay, and there's another one that's for all of them. It's not called all, but it's actually escaping me at the moment. Then there's find. And what it does, it'll find the first value that passes the test. So again, you do a Boolean expression, and if that expression returns true, the first time it returns true, it gives you back that number. But again, the fact that it's looping and doing these tests, how it does that, you don't have to worry about that. That part of the logic is already done for you. That's the beauty of the higher order function. So let's see here. So in that case, it'll return us the first even number. Save. Oh, I want that code showing. Okay, there we go. Save. So the first even number should be 2. And I can change it to find index, and it'll find us the index of the first number that passes the test. So the first even number in this case. But the test could be whatever I want. So that's the cool thing. I can, whatever I do in that callback could literally be anything. Cool. No testing.js. I'm trying to think if there's any other really good low-hanging fruit. I think those are all the main ones. There's other ones. But filter and like map are the ones I use like 90% of the time. But yeah, so that's it. So again, the callback is a function that gets passed in as an argument to another function. Okay. Not always a higher order function, because sometimes it's not acting as a wrapper. It's not breaking up the logic. So a lot of times you'll be passing in a callback just because it runs after that function is done doing what it's doing. So they'll run that function that you pass it at the end to make sure that your function doesn't run until after that first function's done. So that's not necessarily a wrapper. But a lot of times callbacks are higher order functions, like these array functions, where we're essentially wrapping up some looping and return logic, sort of what the result is, and you're just basically inserting the logic of what happens on each iteration. And And it doesn't always have to be looping related, although looping is sort of the most common example, at least in my experience, as far as using higher order functions in JavaScript. So hopefully, yeah, that was useful. Have a great day and enjoy.